back to further debate, and I recognize the member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am glad to be able to stand in this legislature and add what I hope are thoughtful comments to the discussion on Bill 171, which is the Enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act. Many moons ago, but still since having been elected, I had the opportunity to serve as the critic for Community Safety and Correctional Services, as it was called then. And one of the very first pieces of legislation that I was responsible for as critic was the then Bill 80, and that dealt with orcas in captivity. That dealt with basically the marine land story of Kiska, and it was a big and interesting topic, and I remember the passion and enthusiasm of animal welfare experts, and there, maybe with the exception of optometry clients, those who care about animals, they will drop everything that they are doing and rally to look out for and look after animals. And so we're here talking about veterinarians, and I can't imagine that there are very many veterinarians that don't start early in life as enthusiastic animal lovers. I'm quite surprised that my younger brother didn't pursue veterinary sciences, because he was a budding biologist, really, or kind of, when we were up anywhere that there was fresh water, you could find him catching crayfish, kind of, learning all about them. I still remember, and he was a wee little thing, I remember him sobbing and sobbing because he had heard a sound and he went to find, what was making the sound, and it was nature, and it was a small snake eating a small frog, and his poor little heart was just breaking. And that's when I knew that he and I were, he was his mother's child, for sure. I think both of them prefer animals to human company. But as someone who comes from a family of animal lovers, I have an appreciation for the passion and enthusiasm for making the world a better place for animals. And so we have many hats in this legislature, in this role, and we advocate for our constituents, the ones who call us, the ones that email us, and maybe the ones that can't talk or text, but are four-legged friends. And so we're here debating a bill that is, as I said, the Enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act. It updates legislation governing veterinary professionals to reflect current practices. As we've heard from our critic, this was a bill that was well consulted, and we are always glad to have that be the case. It's happened 4 times in my 10 years here? Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, but when we are able to stand here and debate legislation that has been thoughtfully both researched and traveled and had experts weighing in so that it is the best version of the bill that it could be at this point, that is heartening to see. Part of what this bill achieves and includes recognition that veterinary care is delivered by a team and acknowledges the roles of veterinary techs, or vet techs. It defines a scope of veterinary practices that can only be done by registered veterinary professionals, and also it allows for a more streamlined complaints and resolutions process, as well as a new quality assurance program. Sure. And it establishes a reasonable framework, and then coming will be the regulations, right? And that'll be done, certainly, I'm sure that it will be, but I hope that it'll be done in consultation with those who really know what the implications of the regulations would be. And so that the final bill, or it won't come into effect until all of those regulations are done, and that will be following further consultation. So I'll read a little bit here, and Actually, I'll get to that. Yeah, I'll share. The new legislation is stepped forward for veterinary medicine, and this is a piece submitted. The Council of College of Veterinarians of Ontario is optimistic and energized with its new governing legislation presented in Queen's Park. They go on to say, our council and the licensed members of our college recognize the impact of this legislation in supporting veterinary teams and enabling us to serve the public with efficiency, transparency, and accountability. This is good news for the public, for veterinary medicine, and for veterinary teams in Ontario, said Dr. Wade Wright, the college president. Dr. Wright went on to say, the veterinary profession prides itself on our teamwork, our innovation, and our passion for animal health as we deliver safe, quality veterinary medicine. This pride extends to our council, which is committed to serving the public and the profession with efficiency, transparency, and accountability. It has been frustrating to see the mismatch between today's expectations and our legislative authority. The Enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act moves us in the right direction. End quote. Well, that's good, okay? When the folks that you are bringing in legislation about say that this is welcome and that they've been involved in the process, that is a good thing. From the ministry briefing document from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, they had highlighted that some of the key themes from the consultation period were modern legislation is needed, continued governance in the public interest is essential, plan for future innovation, recognize team-based care, ensure flexibility, consider needs of agriculture, non-veterinarian practitioners can and do provide lower-risk care, and engage stakeholders on future regulations. And those are some important key themes. Glad to know that they are part of the process, but it will be interesting for us as legislators to also watch this process continue, right? We have here the piece of legislation that's basically a fresh start, it would seem. I mean, ultimately, this is the new name for the regulatory college will be the College of Veterinary Professionals of Ontario. A bit of a fresh start. It repeals the current Veterinarians Act and replaces it with the Veterinary Professionals Act, or the VPA. It amends the OAVT Act to align with the provisions of the Veterinary Professionals Act. All of this is kind of clean slate. But the other issues that the government would have heard at those consultations, and the other issues that I'm sure will be raised in this House through the thoughtful debate that will undoubtedly follow, will be those next steps, one would hope. So, Speaker, a little bit from the world of veterinary medicine. And here's an article from TVO entitled, A High Emotional Toll, Why Ontario Veterinarians Are Under Pressure. And I'm going to take this opportunity because the bill is called Enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act. I'm going to talk about ways we can enhance care for animals. I'm also going to talk about maybe what doesn't need to be in this bill, but what needs to be considered by the government as they're dealing with this particular profession. So, in sharing this, we have more pets, but we don't have more vets. And as written, this is an article from November 2021. Although the shortage of general and specialized animal care for pets and farm animals is especially acute in Thunder Bay and in many other northern cities and rural areas, vet offices are overbooked right across the province. Indeed, a dearth of vets and veterinary support staff is an issue throughout Canada. There's a high emotional toll that this is taking on people in the vet industry. People that are in this industry, they care a lot. I think that we've heard that, and I think we all know that. Anyone who goes into animal care, that goes into, I imagine, veterinary science, that they pursue that because they care. This is a little bit of an interesting history. I mean, I think we recognize that pandemic pets were a thing, but this part of this article shares, things changed in 2017. Quote, we started to see a real demand for vets. Our students were getting courted before they graduated. They were getting the jobs they wanted, where they wanted them, and starting salaries went up. And pet ownership started taking off around this time. The Canadian Animal Health Institute figures indicate that the country's dog population grew from 7.6 million in 2016 to 8.3 million in 2018. And then during the pandemic, people scrambled to adopt. A November 2020 report found that 18% of current pet owners had obtained a pet during the pandemic. COVID-19 also increased pressure on vet offices as they scrambled to adjust to curbside care, more cleaning, and telemedicine. Staffing availability worsened as people dealt with quarantines, kids at home, and elder care. And that was happening across workplaces, but a lot of stress and pressure on an already pressured and stressed profession. As of 2020, Ontario had 5,125 licensed vets. Again, this is from 2021. And estimates suggest that number should increase by 4% a year to better meet demand. And then it says other long-term trends are at play. The arrival of more animals adopted from other countries, plus climate change, have led to more incidents of illness such as kettle cough, tick-borne Lyme disease, and canine ehrlichiosis. Someone will correct me. Okay. 2 kinds of tapeworm that harm dogs have been newly found in Ontario. And so as this article mentions, you've got a perfect storm for access challenges. So one of the things back in 2021 that it says is that the Veterinary College hopes to expand enrollment beyond its usual 120 spots a year, but doing so would require additional funding from the provincial government. And as we've heard today, that is a step that is being taken. Good. So this is a challenge that is a global challenge, interestingly. So we need more spaces. We need to support vets in the work that they do, and also recognize, as we have talked about, that it's not just highly specialized, it's a specialized human that has to go into this line of work. It's not only the skills, but it is the, I imagine, the emotional connection. So, Speaker, that said, I have a yucky and awful story to share. And as we're talking about a bill that's enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act, and part of it allows for a more streamlined complaints and resolutions process, as well as a new quality assurance program, I want to highlight a really awful story that was from St. Catharines, and a practicing veterinarian in St. Catharines. And I'll read, this is from the National Post, and this is back in 2016. According to the College of Veterinarians of Ontario, a man who once picked a Chihuahua by the neck and punched it repeatedly in the face will, after a brief suspension, be fit to practice veterinary medicine. That man, seen in video footage picking up an anesthetized cat and slamming it against a cabinet, hitting a dog in the snout with nail clippers, and choking another dog until it defecates, can resume treating animals in 10 months, or 6 if he completes a course on animal restraint and behavior modification techniques. The regulatory body has likewise determined that $10,000 is a sufficient fine, which technically was the fee to cover the cost of the proceedings, for this man whose abuse traumatized his patients and his staff, save former employees. So in July, let's see, over the course of 3 years and submitted in 2014, let me back up. The man is Dr. Mahavir Singh Rekhi, whose actions were secretly recorded by staff at Skyway Animal Hospital in St. Catharines over the course of 3 years and were submitted to the College of Veterinarians of Ontario in 2014. In July, the college found Rekhi guilty of professional misconduct for demonstrating consistent behaviors which are not in keeping with standards expected of veterinarians in Ontario. Speaker, I'll go on. The problem with the decision and punishment meted out by the CVO, other than being hilariously soft, is that it assumes there is some rationality to the impulse. I'm not going to read that. It's too graphic. I'm going to paraphrase, to really awfully harm an animal. There is none. And while a perpetrator might be able to learn how and when to repress those urges during a 6 or 10-month suspension, no lesson could possibly remedy the ethical defect afflicting a person who would deliberately hurt an animal like that. Jan Robinson, Chief Executive Officer at the CVO at this time, said that she understands the outrage about Recky's case, but that in the minds of those at the college, a 10-month suspension is a serious suspension, particularly considering that it has revoked the licenses of only 4 vets over the last 20 years. So that's just a piece of it. If you look at this article, which it's awful, or the story is awful, I should say. As far as I know, that vet is still a vet. I can't imagine that he would have a lot of business in that community after people knowing what he had done. I'm going to read another bit about this from the Toronto Star. Ontario law gives the college broad discretion to revoke a license when a veterinarian is found guilty of professional misconduct. If Recky's transgressions don't rise to that level, what possibly could? No one is more dismayed than those who watched the abuses up close and brought the case against Recky. We got over 10 videos of him beating the crap out of animals, said Jessica Hamilton, who worked as a veterinary technician at Skyway. Quote, that should be enough to get his license taken away, and he gets a little tiny slap on the wrist, and he can touch animals again in 4 months. It's really messed up, end quote. So this article goes on to say, for its part, the college says the penalty is strict enough. Quote, revocation is the harshest punitive penalty any college can execute, of course, but revocations across any profession are also exceptionally rare. This piece from the Toronto Star says, Recky should no longer be allowed to treat animals with the province's blessing. The college, which is made up of veterinary professionals, says it exists to protect Ontarians' right to safe and ethical veterinary care. In this case, it seems instead to have protected one of its own, end quote. I was going to read the graphic parts of the article, and I don't want to. They're awful. So this individual was doing purposeful and very vicious harm to animals while they were anesthetized, and otherwise. It was caught on video. His staff turned him in, and as far as I know, he's still practicing in the province. Maybe in a different town where nobody's Googled his name. But when we're standing here talking about Enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act, I want to make sure that the government is reminded that there may be very few egregious scenarios, and if something that hits that threshold of egregious, and as it said, a $10,000 fine which covered the proceedings and 6 months of a suspension, I would like to know what in this bill that says allows for more streamlined complaints and resolutions process, as well as a new quality assurance program. In terrible stories like that, which I hope to God don't happen ever again, the criticism was from the public that they did not feel reassured by that process. So I'm just going to leave that there for the government because, I don't believe that vets would behave that way, but this individual was an exception and an anomaly and did not have the consequences that standing here in my personal opinion would say reflected an appropriate way of handling that. Speaker, I cannot believe I've used up all of my time. Oh, well, I'm going to keep going. Speaker, those of you who've been to Oshawa may or may not know that we're famous for lots of things. We're famous for cars, but did you know that we're famous for kangaroos? So the kangaroo that was bounding around Oshawa, the Schwiggity-roo, I don't know, he didn't get named, she didn't get named, but we had a kangaroo that was on the run in Oshawa, eventually caught by law enforcement, was able to be secured, only got a good, not a punch, but a strike to the vest. Everyone was unharmed. However, what the heck was a kangaroo doing hopping around in Oshawa? I mean, we're exciting, and I invite everybody there, but we're not really known for our outback wildlife. And I'll tell you that I'm raising this because anyone can own a zoo in Ontario. We can't have a, anyone can own a zoo in Ontario. We have a poor track record in terms of our how we handle that, but the government should look into the Oshawa kangaroo and rein in the roos in zoos. Thank you.
Questions? Question, the member from Essex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can appreciate that perhaps the member from Oshawa might not have as much farm or veterinarian concerns in her riding as we have in some other rural ridings, such as my riding or the member from Temiskaming Cochrane. But I'd like to ask her a question about veterinarians that might apply to small animals, because certainly those are common everywhere across the province of Ontario. I think that this piece of legislation would be very useful to all ridings, including the riding of Oshawa, in that it will provide more veterinarians and trained experts in that field to take care of not only farm animals but also pets. And everybody loves their pets. So I would like to invite the member from Oshawa to comment on whether or not she thinks the training of more veterinarians and vet techs under this legislation will be of benefit to the constituents in her riding.
Response, the member from Oshawa.
Yes, I absolutely do. And I know that Oshawa, as all of our communities, has a whole bunch of pets that it loves. As I had just mentioned, we also had a kangaroo that we all claimed wasn't an actual pet. But I think animal care in our community would really, I think people would appreciate having more access to more professionals. So if we can have more vet techs, if we can have vets with maybe some help and support, a few more vets online, that would be great. I share a parking lot with a veterinary clinic, and it is a happening spot. So certainly in Oshawa, as everywhere, we love our pets, and we want to make sure that we have access to the care that they deserve when needed. Thank you.
Further questions? A member from Nickelbrook.
The whole speech was interesting, but I must say that the last little part talking about this kangaroo who ended up in our community sort of piqued my interest. So I was curious to see, how could a kangaroo end up on the side of a road? I mean, we all want to protect animals. We all know that that's not where they belong. They don't even belong on this continent. We don't have kangaroos in the Americas. How did that happen? And I am glad that the police officer were able to recapture this animal, but to do what? Who did that to the kangaroo to start out with?
Member from Oshawa.
Thank you. Folks have a lot of questions about how there was, the Oshawa kangaroo, and it was hopping around for days, and everyone was really interested in making sure that the kangaroo was able to be safe at the end of the story, which, yes, it is. However, where on earth did this kangaroo come from? Apparently, it was being transported from one zoo to another, and they stopped so it could stretch its legs, literally hopped over a fence and ran away. So who was transporting this and why? I know, but next time it could be a lion, okay? Next time it could be, and I know, but zoo owners are not beholden to anyone. So I'll read something here. I know zoo owners that have transported crocodiles in the back of their car. There is stricter legislation that needs to be considered when it comes to zoos. We're famous for roadside zoos, and some of you might feel affectionate towards them, but we do not have regulations, and you too could have a roo.
Further questions? The member from Kent, Nipissing.
Thank you.
I can't.
Thank you, Speaker. Chatham-Kent Leamington. I'm going to invite you to come down and anyone else to come down and see our area. And I want to stray from the topic of the Oshawa kangaroo, but on that point, there is because that doesn't have anything to do with this bill. It's interesting, ripped from the headlines, but there is something that the member from Oshawa touched on that we will bring some relevance here. And does the member from Oshawa agree that through streamlining the complaint process and clarifying the role of investigators, we're actually strengthening the ability to investigate instances of animal welfare?
Thank you. Response, member from Oshawa.
You're not wrong that I digressed to talk about kangaroos and that was ripped from a headline, but also we lived it in Oshawa. But it is interesting, and I'll reconnect it to this bill. Somewhere at some zoo, there are kangaroos that this province doesn't know about. Because at these roadside zoos, they're not licensed, they're not anything. The government does not have eyes on it unless they get a complaint, okay? But there hopefully are vets that are looking after those animals, one would hope. But again, when Ontario is ranking dead last in zoo regulations report cards, the government knows that there is that gap. So you've got animal professionals, veterinarians that are being called to look after animals that shouldn't be allowed to be there. Okay, so there are some pieces that I imagine you will hear from the veterinary community. But again, when this government calls a bill, Enhancing Professional Care for Animals Act, then I would say that all zoos should ensure that they have professional care for animals. Thank you.
Further questions? Member from Spadina, Fort York.
Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the comments from the member from Oshawa. My family's from Oshawa, and when I go to visit there, I hear often about the incredible work that you're doing for the community and how much it's appreciated. You were talking about the kangaroo. In Toronto, we had a pair of capybaras that escaped from the High Park Zoo a while ago, and they went gallivanting all over the city. They were spotted in Scarborough and everywhere else before they were finally, brought home. You talked about this kangaroo that was on the lam in the schwa, but there's another story as well, I understand, about a deer that showed up for work one day. Can you please tell us about the deer that showed up?
Response, member from Oshawa.
We serve all sorts in Oshawa, it was a Sunday morning, and my staffer got a call from the police and was asked if he worked for Jennifer French, the MPP, and when he confirmed, they said, you have to come to the office on a Sunday morning, and he did not know what he would find. But there were like 5 or 6 cop cars, and a deer had run through my glass window, done a lap around my office, left me messages, and left again. And we saw the security footage, and it was quite a day. And that deer ran back and had stories to tell. There were 2 other deers that came to Oshawa that day. One of them, we don't know where it went, and the other one ran into a bar. And that deer ran into a bar and passed the bar, and the bartender was behind, and one person got up and ran behind, and the other sat there and didn't miss a sip. And that deer stood at the back for 4 or 5 hours waiting for karaoke until the vets and the ministry came to peacefully trank it, take it out on a sled, get it care, and release it, also with stories. So welcome to Oshawa, but all that to say, a vet probably doesn't know what their day is going to look like, especially on a Sunday in Oshawa.
Quick question, quick response. Member from Aurora Newmarket.
Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for her remarks, and I am confident that the member from Oshawa agrees with the benefits of a Quality Assurance Committee, and I would also believe that the member also agrees that continued education for a regulated profession does align with other regulated professions like doctors, lawyers, for example. So my question to the member is, do you believe it is an important feature to ensure that those who administrate animal care do have the most up-to-date education? Thank you.
Response, the member from Oshawa.
Yes, absolutely. I think up-to-date training with newest technologies, or and while I'm sure that some veterinary techniques, as we heard from the member from Temiskaming, tell us that there are some tried and true techniques that you maybe aren't going to learn in school. You might have to learn by doing or learn on the farm. But I absolutely think that ensuring veterinarian vets and vet techs have the best education and up-to-date training, that's super. What we also are glad to see is more spaces, but we need to make sure that those vets have the support they need to stay in practice, that they can indeed be found across communities where they're needed. And those that are from other countries, I have read that it's also a recommendation to be able to get them into practicing in a fair way, but make sure there's a clear path for those who come with transfer benefits.
Thank you.